Oh, hey there, CNFers. Can I say something here atop the show that I'm pretty stoked about? I got approved to be a brand ambassador for Athletic Brewing. They make my favorite NA or near beers. I'll soon have a coupon code and a referral link if you want to experiment with it and try it, maybe get a discount or something. But I just wanted to share that because I dig what they make. And I'm not above having some alcoholic beer, but it's nice to know you can keep the good times alive without waking up the next morning in a puddle of your own shame, if you follow me. Anyway, stay tuned for that. I'm just excited about it. I don't get any money. I get some discounts or whatever. But it's just something I'm excited about. And I think it's if you like beer as much as I do, but you don't always want to be hammered or hungover, it's a great option. So in any case, stay tuned. All right. Is this a great podcast or is it cake? It's a joke that endlessly cracks me up. I think I'm the only one. I have to be the only one. Maybe me and Mikey Day. Maybe Mikey Day would think it's funny. Maybe. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Doesn't matter. Hey, CNF, this is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, the show where I speak to badass people about the art and craft of telling true stories. I'm Brendan O'Mara, the avatar of the frustrated, disgruntled writer. How are you? You okay? I wonder sometimes if maybe that's my role in this world. It's not to succeed in being a writer, but to succeed as someone trying to succeed but failing at a writing career. Someone to articulate how crummy we all feel when things are going horribly, horribly awry. But you know who does have his shit together? It's Chris Solomon.
There's something to be said for quality of life because this job isn't about the money.
Sing it, man. Sing it. Chris is a contributing editor to Outside Magazine. What's a contributing editor? You'll find out, because I had no idea what it was. Whose work has appeared in Wired, GQ, and so many other places. I'm going to have some links to some of his stories, specifically the latest one for Outside Magazine that prompted this invite on the pod, and this GQ essay he had about his mother and father. So you can find that at BrendanO'Mara.com. Hey. When I think of writing nonfiction, it's writers like Chris and Gloria Liu from episode 300 fame who stand out. I like outdoor sport writing, that immersive stuff where part of the pay is the fact that you get to do shit you love. And maybe that is grist for the mill because it's all copy, baby. Olives for the oil. Oh my God, stop, B.O. This is why you fail. He's at Chris A. Solomon on Twitter, and chrissolomon.net is his website for a more expansive array of the work he's done, and he's done quite a bit of work. And the recent piece he wrote for Outside Magazine has this for an opening graph, okay? A few years ago, I crossed an unseen boundary and entered the land of middle age. The shift came slowly, then abruptly, and there I was, at 48, the new guy in a place whose inhabitants talked about poor sleep, unfaithful bowels, and watching soccer instead of playing it. I adapted to these strange ways with an ease that surprised me until I no longer recognized myself. Once, every morning had glowed bright with heroic possibilities. Now I felt like I was immersed in a tub of cooling bathwater. Nothing was wrong exactly. Everything was just less, including myself, and I was scared. And that's why I sent Chris an electronic mail message and said, let's talk, man. Let's talk it out, because life has made me soft and frustrated and cozy, and I want to be hard, less frustrated, Spartan-esque, ascetic. I want to push my limits. Shit, I want to find those limits. Show notes and the Up to 11 Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter at BrendanO'Mara.com. Hey. Keep the conversation going on Twitter at CNFPod. And if you link up to the show, I'll give you those digital fist bumps. So you could also head over to Apple Podcasts and consider a rating and a written review. Those go a real long way towards validating the enterprise for the wayward CNF. We're up to 120. Would love to see some more written ones, but hell, that's awesome for this little podcast that could. Stay tuned for my world-famous parting shot about what I don't even know yet. You'll just have to wait and listen, friend, because it's high time we riff here in the Hellfire Club. That is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast. Nowadays, too, given just how freelancers can be a bit more nimble and geographically agnostic. How have you found that? How is your freelancing and the journalism you do? How has that been affected by getting into a less metropolitan area?
It doesn't. I do less travel writing than I used to. I used to do quite a bit of travel writing, and since I don't travel that much for work anymore, it's not a problem. I've got a good internet connection. The phone connection's good, and I can get over to the Seattle airport in 3.5 hours if I need to. I can get to Spokane airport in 3 hours. And so it's really not a problem. And I don't really get on a plane that often anymore. So in short, it's worked out really well. And I can knock off of work and go for a trail run, in 5 minutes, which there's something to be said for quality of life, because this job isn't about the money. So
exactly right. Say, given that you're able to kind of zip out and go for a nice trail run, like just for the for the people out there who might want to visualize where it is you run and kind of the landscape you're in, like how would you describe your trail in the ones that you routinely run?
Yeah, well, so I'm kind of on the east side of the North Cascades, a little bit in the rain shadow of the Cascade Mountains. So we still get plenty of snow and stuff in the winter, and so enjoy winter sports. But then in the summer, it's sort of where big mountains meet high desert.
Okay.
Kind of. So it's almost a little more rolling hills and mountainous than, say, Bend, Oregon. But kind of, if people are more familiar with something like that, so it's where sort of pine trees meet sagebrush. It's a nice country, and just a little slower pace. Got myself some chickens, and then just kind of. It can be hard to sit sometimes at the computer because nice sunny days versus in Seattle, it's pretty easy to just hunker down with another cup of good coffee and hunker in the cold rain. But out here, it's pretty sunny a lot. So,
speaking of, the wonderful distraction that it can be to have the outdoors at your fingertips or at your feet. Earl Swift, who often contributes to Outside Magazine and is an author of several amazing books, he lives basically, in the shadow of the Appalachian Trail, if that makes any sense, a shadow. But he's on the App Trail in Virginia, so like almost every day he goes for a little 5 mile jaunt, 2.5 miles out, 2.5 back. And that's a very important part of his creative process and a way to stay refreshed. Oftentimes when our hip flexors are bent at 90 degrees and we're at a desk all day long. So I imagine that having those kind of trails and that kind of scenery at your disposal is very recharging and invigorating.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously one can recharge anywhere. But it's really nice to just be able to get up from the desk and be moving in a couple minutes. That's always just been really something I value a great deal. And so to be able to do it here, where we're in an area I really enjoy, is really satisfying. And it was just getting really hard to do it in Seattle, where you couldn't get some of the parks I liked, what used to take 5 minutes, and it took, to 30 minutes, 40 minutes to get over, across town and stuff, or much less to get to the foothills of the Cascades. And that was, just part of my frustration with living in that city that I still have a lot of affection for. Change can be hard for those of us who've been watching it, just as it was hard for the people who came before me, I imagine. So.
I haven't gotten up there yet, but I imagine you've been there quite a bit. And it's one of the least trafficked national parks is like Cascade National Park. Have you been there and frequented that park quite a bit in your time in Seattle?
Yeah, I spent a fair amount of time in North Cascades National Park, and it's. I think the reason it often is said to be so little traffic is just there's not that many ways into it, so except on foot, and so like many places, it gets kind of nibbled at the edges, but people don't venture in very far. Though that, like everything right now, especially since the pandemic, that's changing. And so you see a lot more people than you used to. But by and large, you can still get out there and have a quiet experience if you're a little savvy and you choose when you go. You can. I was out there. I mean, not in the park, but I was just out, for a run yesterday and chose wisely, and I was all by myself, which was great.
Over the years, I've always, you see these things like so-and-so is a contributing editor to whatever magazine, and you're a contributing editor to Outside. And what does it mean to be a contributing editor?
I think the answer is it depends. I think that title can come with different things depending on the publication. At Outside, and I don't say this too snarkily, it's a title. It doesn't come with anything. I think it just is a bit of an honorific that says, hey, we have a relationship with you. We value what you do. You've written a fair amount for us, and you continue to. But it is that the title specifically didn't come with any money. I mean, to put it bluntly, I think for some other publications, maybe like the New York Times Magazine, you'll see people that it says contributing writer. I'm not for sure, but I think that might be more of a contractual relationship. That said, like I was a contract writer for Outside Magazine for about 3 years as well, and like that wasn't like on the masthead. I called myself a contract writer as well, because literally I had a contract with them to write a certain number of words and articles a year. And so I was a contributing editor who did have a contract. So in short, I mean, it's a kind of a mushy term that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it goes on the resume, and I put it in emails to people. Yeah.
Yeah, in reading John McPhee's draft number 4 about all his craft essays on writing, even the term staff writer at the New Yorker, he kind of said what you just said. It's kind of this nebulous term that is basically just a freelance title, but it does sound a little. It sounds like it has more heft than it actually does, but it's more like a freelance agreement.
Yeah, that was surprising when I think I first discovered that in that book, because staff. At other publications, staff writer does mean something. It does mean that you have some kind of serious relationship. The New Yorker has, I think, a kind of an odd take on it that way. But I think what in that there is no money definitely changing hands monthly or every 2 weeks. They do try to get them work as a result, and I think the only relationship seems to be that they are the preferred writers for them. But yeah. It was surprising to me that they use that term. But it doesn't mean a contractual relationship necessarily, and that is odd.
Yeah. It almost strikes me as more like there's a bunch of people who may or may not be salaried, but they're like in the bullpen, and they're like, oh, okay, we're going to call in the lefty now for this particular story, or we'll go to them for, oh, what do you have for ideas? Because we trust you, and you've done this for X amount of years. Like, so what's on your plate? Like, what ideas excite you? Okay, go, Patrick Ryden Keefe. Like, go chase it.
Yeah, and some of them, and I'm speaking a little out of school here. I don't know how some of these work, but I do know New York Times Magazine and some of those others. They do have some of their writers. They have a certain number of words they try to contract with or get their writers to do each year, and like that came up recently when it's kind of a long story, but like they wanted to throw a story idea to another writer because they needed to get they need to get those writers to do that number of words each year because they're paying them that they're essentially on contract to do a certain number of words as a contributing writer or something. And so they want to get them to fulfill those contracts. So it can be just as a freelancer who isn't one of them, it can be a little challenging because they're gobbling up a bunch of the words.
And, we kind of brought up McPhee, and I, brought up Patrick Radden Keefe just in passing here. But who are some writers that that you've maybe read when you were coming up and like really developing your chops as a writer and a reader who you really wanted to model?
Well, you did mention McPhee, and maybe it's a little bit of a cliche, but I've read a bunch of his stuff, and I really have admired it a lot and liked a great deal of it. So he certainly has been one. And then I read a fair bit of Ian Fraser as well, whose work I also really like. I like how kind of smart it is and how he's got both him and McPhee have this really nice kind of understated sense of humor, which I really enjoyed. And I like with both of them how much homework they do, but they try to wear it kind of lightly. And so I think those have been, and then, I did read a lot of sort of the classic, kind of classic sort of magazine writers like Joseph Mitchell and stuff, who I think made a big impression on me. I will confess I'm not as well read as some other magazine writers. I tend to read more books, embarrassingly perhaps, than magazine articles, because I've just always really loved long stories. But those guys have been big influences on me. It's funny. I was thinking about this question the other day. You'd asked me before we talked about like who else sort of influenced you early on, and I had maybe. I don't know if there's a cop out to that question, but it's also a very genuine response. Is that I've thought about this a bunch in the last year or so. Is that one of the biggest influences, Brendan, was not necessarily writers at all, but it was like my parents and especially my father, and but then also my very first writing instructors. John Feinstein was when I was at Duke University, he taught a seminar, the sports writer John Feinstein. And then also I took a basic fiction writing class with a great fiction writer named Clyde Edgerton. And what they all had in common was they just had boundless enthusiasm for young writers. And what was particularly remarkable about that is they had boundless enthusiasm, given that I didn't give them much to be enthusiastic about,
Right.
and but I think about this all the time, that like what kind of shit was I showing them? And yet they still were supportive, and they still saw like the excitement that I had about doing this. Like I found something really interesting in writing, and they saw the most meager spark that probably wasn't going to go anywhere. And they just constantly were supportive, and they constantly were encouraging. And what a gift that was for these people who I admired and who were in positions to just kill someone's dream, right? And they
Right.
and they didn't, and they were like, keep going, keep working harder. And like I've looked back and seen some of that crap I wrote, and it just dreck, just terrible stuff. But like they didn't judge it. They just kept encouraging, and like I think about that all the time. That like people can tell you later what's wrong with your stuff, but like what you need at the beginning, and like I feel like what people like me need to do as we get a little older is like be that well of encouragement to other people and to younger people, I mean, because they're going to get plenty of criticism. I mean, there's no lack of abundance of that, as people get older. But to have that kind of support and excitement about writing and journalism when they're young is just tremendous. And I think that's one of the things that kept me going and to get a little better. So anyway, that's kind of a very long-winded response to your question.
Well, I think that's wonderful. And what's even worse sometimes than maybe getting criticism, like criticism's great, and especially when it's constructive, as you say, leave the safe confines of university and there is you're putting work out there, and then you just hear crickets or nothing at all, into the endless void of an editor's inbox, and you're just like, I don't know, is this bad? Did they not see it? Or did they see it and not care, and they just don't have the time to reply? Yeah. Like, that to me is almost worse than having someone criticize the work, because sometimes you just don't know. Am I bad, or are they busy? Like, without feedback, you don't know where the deficiency is. Yeah.
And so people taking the time to stop and think about it and respond, and then also to be encouraging. As I was thinking about this stuff, again, I was thinking, the popular word these days is privilege, and it's true. I had tremendous privilege to have these caring parents, and then to be able to go to a school that, where I got this kind of attention and stuff. And I never deny that. It was a tremendous gift, but I feel like that really helped me get going, and then, get other opportunities and got me excited to then keep trying and keep getting better. And that spark, maybe started to catch fire a little bit. So.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned your father, and that essay you wrote for GQ a couple years ago was that was brilliant. I was so glad you shared that with me, and I read that, and it was just such an incredibly touching essay. And he was a very musical person, played a lot of piano, and you said you had the great privilege of having supportive parents, and I imagine that his playing music and your mother singing, that must have informed you in some way as you became a creative person and a writer yourself.
Interesting family. A complicated family. I'm trying to write some more about it right now. But my father in particular, very creative. He was an Army colonel who put on musicals and wrote music. And a family friend recently told me he once made it rain inside a theater. Just a really creative guy. But he really encouraged creativity in us. So he was very happy to see me do some writing, because he enjoyed writing as well, as part, writing music lyrics and things like that. So my older sister became a writer of a sort as well. She had been a freelance writer for the Washington Post in college, and for sports, and then kind of stringing, and then and now works as an executive at NBC Sports. And so I think he really enjoyed seeing his kids pursue some things that, obviously one person can't do everything, but in another life, I think he would have liked to have done some of the things we did. So he loved to live vicariously through his kids.
Oh, that's great, because sometimes that living vicarious through kids, and I'm thinking specifically of athletics, can be incredibly toxic and can push you in quite literally the opposite direction, or the parent harbors some degree of resentment, being like, shit, they're doing this cool thing, and I'm going to kind of, I don't know, if they give me their stuff to read, I'm going to like shit all over it and make them feel like crap. Yeah. So that's great that they were supportive for that.
Yeah, no, he was very supportive in the latter. It was a little complicated growing up because we were not maybe the athletes. None of us, we're all reasonably athletic people, but we're not by no means gifted. And I think I come from a very type A family, and and I think it was I think my father was of the mind that if you put your head down and you work hard, you can do whatever you want, which is a certain way of viewing the world, and it works in many instances, but it doesn't necessarily work for athletics. And I think we disappointed him repeatedly. You don't just win a race because you train harder than other people, because other people are training pretty hard as well. So anyway, that's a whole longer topic, but it was a good job all in all. So.
This episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens. Listen, you've probably heard of these guys, and I have yet to try this product, but what I dig about them is that they're plant-based, which is important to me. Otherwise, this would be a non-starter. With one delicious scoop, you get 75. Wow, that's a lot. Right, Hank? 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food, sourced superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports gut health, nervous system, immune system, energy, recovery, focus, and aging. All the things. I'm excited to dig into this stuff because it's vegan. But if you're one of those keto bros, it's compliant and all that stuff. I like paleo too. It also supports better sleep quality and recovery. So if you're an early riser, you can wake up fresher and ready to tackle your work or your workouts, whatever you want to do. I don't know. What else is pretty rad is in 2020, Athletic Greens purchased carbon credits that support projects protecting old growth rainforests. If you want to experience Athletic Greens to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/emerging. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/emerging to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Well, there's a definitive limit to your people's talent, especially athletically. And, we're born on certain athletic and genetic bases, and we can push that as far as it can go. But when you brush up against someone who is truly gifted, whether it be that baseball or basketball, it's just like, oh, you're up against like a different class of human. And they're just like, when you brush up against, if you're lucky enough to, it's like, oh, wow, that's a freak. That's what it takes to run sub 2.5 hour marathons or dunk a basketball or throw a ball from deep right field on a beeline to home plate. And you're like, oh, okay, it's just a different species.
Yeah. I mean, there's just some natural gifts, better VO2 max and other things. And so it's, I could go on and on. I'm trying to, we'll work on some stuff related to that. Anyway, but,
Well, with the GQ essay about your parents and your father falling ill to Parkinson's, what was the challenge for you as a reporter reporting on yourself and your family?
Well, I'd written about my dad before for Runner's World years before, but I wanted to. My mom is sort of the quiet hero of our family, as a mother probably is for many people's families. And as I watched the end of my parents' marriage, as my father circled the drain with Parkinson's disease and my mother taking care of him, I realized I wanted to write about my mom a bit. And I wanted to try to capture, it occurred to me one day, and I don't know why it took years of watching this awful kind of loving spectacle of the end and her caring for him. It finally occurred to me that I should write about this. But it is a weird experience to go home and start reporting on your own family. And I hadn't done that before in that way, where I would, and I only kind of talked to my mom about it after I'd basically been doing it for a while. So it felt, we could talk about this a little bit. It felt a little bit almost duplicitous isn't the right word, but it felt like I was doing something that I was hiding something. But I would watch all day what was going on in the house, and the tremendous care she was taking for my father, and the tremendous abuse she took from my father, who was suffering from a dementia induced by Parkinson's. It's just awful stuff. This proud, great guy just falling to pieces. and then I would go back in the guest room and I would write and I would take notes. And it was a strange kind of experience, but it was a way also to pay attention and to process it, and all sorts of therapy words. And then I tried to write about it, and I eventually told my mom what I was doing, and she sounded very hesitant. She's a person of a certain age where you just don't even talk about this stuff. And
Right, yeah.
but then I showed it to her, and she I think she was quietly pleased with it, despite how difficult it was. But of course, I was not. I'm of the mind, like, look, this is my family. I'm not going to talk about something that I'm not comfortable with showing it to them. I mean, I owe my family, I owe my mom everything, and so I was not going to try and go behind her back. So I wanted her to read it before I ever published it, and she read it, and and soaked it all up. I think she even made a correction or two to it, and so yeah, that's what I did. But I wanted to, here was this major event in our family's life, and in my life too. My dad and I are pretty close, and so I wanted to try and write about it. There's a friend of mine has a great quote that he always says from the wonderful author who wrote the book, the screenplay to You've Got Mail. But the quote is just, it's all copy, which is the phrase, which is the copy, meaning it's all material for writing. Your whole life is, and that might sound kind of mercenary, but I think if you're a writer, or if you're a certain kind of writer, it's true. Like, everything you experience is something that potentially is something you could use. And I felt like, and it's often the best. It's often the best, most heartfelt, most sincere work you can do. And I feel like that was one of the pieces I've done that I'm most proud of, because it feels like you can write about yourself and your family and things like that you understand and are most close to better than you can write about a scientist in the field. So anyway, this is a really long way of saying it was a hard story to do. It took months to write, and I rewrote it a couple times. But it was a really, really satisfying story. Those essays have been the most satisfying things I've done in my career, and ironically, they're not straight journalism.
To the point you made about it's all copy. I have just in my notes here, I wanted to ask you about just the nature of always, turning life experiences into story, or turning life into story, be it the, very personal essay for GQ, or even the recent piece you wrote for Outside magazine. And it seems like you're always attuned to that, be it you might write about it. So you're always like, what notebook is always in hand, so to speak. So at what point were you cognizant of that? It's just that life is copy, and that you were like, what, I'm just always going to be attuned to the potential of writing, taking this personal experience and distilling it into something that's artful.
I think there's different kinds of writers, right? I mean, I have a friend who's won more than one Pulitzer Prize, an amazing writer, more sensitive to the world and to other people than I will ever be. And he never writes about his life or himself. It's always about other issues, and social issues and justice issues and stuff. That's amazing. Like, that's what he does. And there's a dozen other kinds of writers. One thing I've just realized is, like, over the course of the last 15 years is, like, they did one essay and then another. I was like, well, I like writing all kinds of stuff, but, like, things that have a personal element, especially full-on kind of personal essays, I find incredibly satisfying, because they're really hard, and if they work, and they often don't, and I have 10 of them in the drawer that I've never finished, but that's but that happens, but if they work, then I come away and I've understood something new about myself and about the world, which I find incredibly satisfying. And the third thing is that well, maybe 3 or 4 things. I mean, I find that they offer an avenue to write creatively in a way that that some of the work that I've done doesn't allow. And so, I've been a newspaper reporter, I've been a business writer, I've been done all sorts of kinds of stuff, and often there's not room to write incredibly creative. I mean, just information has to be conveyed, and sometimes as a freelance writer, I sometimes feel like a glorified bricklayer, like just putting together stacks of information, sometimes with a slightly creative filler. And that's not, and that's important, that kind of work. I'm not denigrating it, but like I got into the job because I really like writing. And in part, I mean, you can get into this job for all kinds of reasons, but that always floated my boat. And I think what I like about the essays is like trying to explore different things and be able to say them in kind of memorable ways. And I think there's more opportunity to do that more frequently throughout the piece in personal pieces. And so I've found myself doing more and more of them in the last several years. So I've probably gotten up to maybe having done about a dozen. And I just find them really satisfying. And other people could disagree, and that's great. If we all did the same thing, it would be pretty boring.
Yeah.
What's that Mark Twain quote about differences of opinion is what makes horse races.
Right.
So I'm not sure if that. As usual, I lose the question, but I think those are the reasons why I've been drawn more and more to personal things, or like even for instance, I wrote this recent piece in the May-June issue of Outside Magazine, and I've been wrestling a lot with running problems, which is running is a lifelong passion of mine. I'm also wrestling a great deal with getting older, and I had heard about this great trip to go run through the Alps, and it seemed impossibly difficult and impossibly far to go do something like that, this 9-day trip with incredible amounts of vertical relief and distance. And I thought, that's sort of a travel story, but like, what's it really about for me? It's really a story for me about like, this is kind of a midlife crisis story for me, except I'm not rich. I'm not going to go buy a Porsche Cayenne. I'm not going to go have an affair. I'm not even married. I guess I can't have an affair. But
launch your own tequila brand, as you write.
Yeah. But this, what is the real story here? So I tried to make it a little more than just a travel story. It's a story about a guy who's kind of struggling a bit in a couple ways, but like maybe, I know running doesn't solve everything, but boy, being able to run far and healthily through beautiful country with friends, at a certain age, that would go a long way for me, to feeling pretty good about life. And so I kind of framed it that way. And so it added a satisfying for me way to talk about, what otherwise is, on day 1 we did this, and on day we did this, and, on day 3 it was hard, which otherwise can feel a little bit like laying those bricks. So yeah, I guess that's another long-winded response to you.
Well, I think what in nonfiction, what can be really hard when you're doing more third-person reporting is that it's hard to reach a certain level of interiority with those characters. And that's what's so great about fiction and novels, is that you can imagine the interior landscape of the characters. So with these personal stories, instead of it just being beads on a string of you day 1 of this run, you're able to overlay your own interiority, which is what gives such depth and heft and the animating force of a piece of this nature. And I think that's the pull too, because we have access to interiority where it's very hard to access when we're trying to report it out and pull it out of somebody.
But I really like the way you said that, because I mean, I'm always encountering people who've thought about this stuff more than I have. You articulated it well. I mean, there's only a couple pieces in some ways of straight magazine reporting that I think about often, that have really scratched the itch deeply. That is the kind of work I want to be doing every time as a quote unquote magazine writer, and they have started to get toward that interiority with my subject, and they're challenging though, because they require time. They require a lot of time with someone, and that costs money. That costs money for the magazine. That costs you money as the writer, because it takes a lot of time. It requires a lot of patience for the subject, and so they're hard pieces to do. And like in our go world now, it can be hard to find outlets that are willing to kind of give you that length of rope to either succeed or hang yourself, and to give you that amount of space to unspool that kind of work. But I think you're absolutely right to kind of get that interiority. I'll just mention two places where I feel that's kind of worked. I did this story a couple years ago for Outside Magazine that I think worked really well, where I went. It's a profile of a veterinary pathologist up in Alaska, and a veterinary pathologist is kind of she's a scientist who does autopsies on dead animals, and she cuts up everything from wood bison to seals to walruses to polar bears, and she's often looking for the diseases that have killed them unnaturally. And what that's telling us now about the changing far north under climate change, because all sorts of new animals, insects, and disease is marching north as the far north is changing faster than anywhere else. And so I went up and spent a month up in Alaska. I got like a cheap sublet, and I lived up in Anchorage, and she lived outside of Anchorage, and I would see her every couple of days. And I really got a chance to get to know this woman, this scientist. We're still friends. And, I watched her cut up like 5 different animals. And I went out on the tide flats with her one day as she cut up one. And like, you just that amount of time with someone, you get to know their personality. You get to watch them work repeatedly and ask them questions, and then follow up questions days later. You get to see their tics. You get to know the names of their family members, but in just a more intimate, slowly unspooling way. And I feel that I think that's where I start to bring some value added as a magazine writer. Like I was not a good deadline writer. Like I can't do that quick hit stuff. It's very stressful. It's not satisfying. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons I hated it. But like that slowly unspooling stuff, I think is really fun and interesting. And the story, it turned out great. It won a bunch of awards and stuff. And one other example I'll just give is I've got a story that's about to come out with Wired magazine, and the story has taken 18 months to report, and not every day or anything, but it's this crazy crime caper in which I've got this vigilante guy who's chasing this guy, and I got turned. I can't tell you anything about it right now, really, until it pops, but over 18 months, I've really gotten to know my main character. I mean, we were texting for like an hour yesterday, and we just really know each other. And I feel like it just adds that amount of texture. I mean, every week or so, I add another line to the story. And unfortunately now it's like 8,000 words, and it won't be able to be 8,000 words. But I mean, that amount of time, it just changes the story. It just makes it better and better. And, you get to the point where you're just cutting good stuff, and what you have left is just really enjoyable. So I think you're right about getting to know the interiority. I mean, in the case of this latest story, I've literally got all these moments of interiority of him talking to himself and stuff, because he's told me. So I think what these essays and what these reported stories I'm proud of share is that sense of interiority, whether it's my own or someone else's who I've finally spent enough time with to that I have a real sense of it that I trust is accurate.
Yeah, and with the outside piece, the opening, vignette of it, which is, speaking of interiority, is just, you contemplating this essentially kind of like a slouching towards middle age, and it's just like wanting to be a better runner again and try to awaken something inside you. And that really spoke to me, because I'm in 2 weeks I turn 42, so I'm a little younger than you, not by much. But I'm kind of feeling that sort of crunch of time, and I just feel a bit. It could be pandemic related too, but I'm just like kind of fleshy. I'm an athletic person, but I feel like it's more dormant, and so I'm trying to work through that. And so your piece just hit me like at this nexus of I have a similar feeling of just like wanting to reclaim some of that athleticism and get to a point of just feeling more, just an optimized version of myself, just for my own well-being. And so, yeah, maybe you can take us to the headspace that you're talking to, that you opened this piece about, that kind of feeling of, oh man, oh shit, like I'm in this middle age, I'm having this kind of crisis, and if I don't act on this impulse to reclaim some of that athleticism, shoot, I'm just going to wither on the vine.
Well, this is something I have been thinking about a lot. I mean, I guess I had two answers to this question. The first one is just very specifically is like, I've been agonizing over getting older for a while now. And then, and so it has been on my mind quite a bit. And I wrote for Outside an essay that got some nice attention about the wheels completely coming off like about 4 years ago, and like being unable to run at all. And so the essay was kind of like, oh shit, this is middle age. And like, this is middle age as an active person. And I never saw this coming. And a lot of people were like, it me, and they really, right. and so people really responded to that. And it kind of, I had no idea that many people would respond to it. And it was a real eye opener that, wow, okay, we all go through this to various degrees, and so many of us get hit by this train. And then I was able to, I wrote a story that came out in January in Runner's World about sort of finding a solution as a runner. And I finally, after like $20,000 over several years, a physical therapist was like, oh, you don't have a blood problem or a bone problem. You're just a terrible runner. And he has helped me fix my gait and posture. And so that story in Runner's World was a little bit about being middle-aged, but it was mostly like actually just sort of a technique story, but it turned out well. So this has really been on my mind about like the changes that happen. So I'm trying to work on a longer thing right now about that, which I hope which leads to maybe the second thing I want to talk about, which is like, even when I've been thinking about this a lot, like, even very personal stories, they're going to succeed if they're really not a personal story. And what I mean by that, if you'll hang with me on this, is that a personal story works if it's really a universal story. And I see a lot of people write like kind of first person essays and things. And if I can just be a jerk for a second, I'll be like, that was terrible. And I'll read that and I'll be like, and it was just like, I did this and I did that. And I'm sad because my mom died. And I think, but it like doesn't, and I'm not doubting their sincerity, not at all, of course. Like I've had a parent die now and, we're all going to go through that. But like what I think people struggle with a lot, and, and I struggle with this every time I try and write a personal piece, is like, how do you make your personal, your own personal story it needs to be like a metaphor for everybody's story. Because people read, I mean, it's like a poem, right? A poem about an apple isn't a poem about an apple. It's about the universe or whatever. So your story really needs to be a story that opens up on everybody. And it doesn't mean it needs to talk about everybody else, but somehow everybody needs to see themselves and their life in your story. And I think that's what I see often people don't pull off in personal stories. It's all about, they're so solipsistic or navel gazing that they don't pick their head up and realize that that's the real goal of their story. Their personal story is to make other people kind of recognize that it's also about them. And anyway, I think about this a lot because I've been reading other people's essays and I'm like, why isn't this working? And one of the reasons that one of the ways you can do that, and I guess you didn't ask for my advice, but here you go.
No, please.
Is that full of middle-aged white guy opinions?
We need more of them.
Yeah. The world needs more middle-aged white guy thought. But I have noticed this is like there is this sense that because it's a personal essay, it needs to have a lot of I and me and then I did this and then I did that. Or even in travel stories, personal travel stories, I did this and I did that. One way to make them less that is just like take out all the stuff about I and me. Like some of the best, that's one of the things I really have learned from good travel writers and from McPhee and from Ian Fraser, who a lot of their work essentially is kinds of travel writing. Is like, they're never the subject of the sentence. Like, but I read a recent bad piece of somebody's personal essay, and there were 35 mentions of I and me in like a page and a half. And like, I don't know if I've become too much attuned to it now, but like, I won't read that because it's like, it can't get out of its own way. The subject can't realize that it's not really about them. I'm not sure if this is making sense, but like, you don't need to say in a travel story, I went into the barn. You say the barn was, decrepit with peeling red, paint.
Where the I is implicit.
Yeah. And then, maybe 7 sentences in, the old man milking the ornery cow, in the back corner said hello. You know what I mean? By then you're in the barn. You said hello to me. Okay, now you're in there, but you already knew you were in there. So like that's one thing I just notice about people trying to do that stuff is like take yourself out of it, and just a little bit goes a long way. Anyway, that's something that's been on my mind a lot.
Well, it's a great articulation of what I think makes for great memoir and good personal essay. Like you said, like the narrator in a sense is implicit. You don't need to hit everyone over the head. Like, we know you're there. You can even just say like that person, like the milking the ornery cow. You can even just kind of say like, oh, he said hello to me. And in a sense, it's like, okay, now we're like fully like on the shoulder of the narrator who's doing this skillfully. And I had this experience with, so I've been trying to, for a long time, sell this memoir about my father in baseball. And when I was talking to my dad about it, because he's similarly to your parents, like of a generation who doesn't like to talk much, and in interviewing him to try to get various insights into our lives, he was just very closed off. And I was just like, listen, Dad, like some of this stuff might feel kind of raw and naked, and I get that. I totally understand that. But if I do my job well, what's going to happen is you and I are going to dissolve, and then the reader is going to overlay their experience over us, and they're going to picture, their father or their daughter and so forth, and then we're just kind of like this vessel for them to experience their story, though they're kind of just digesting ours. But it's not like they're going to judge us or even remember us. They're going to, like I said, overlay their experience, and then we just kind of fade into the background. And that's, I think, what you're getting at is like when you do a personal story well, the reader the narrator dissolves away, and the reader then just kind of has the experience they're going to have. Like, oh wow, that was nice. It made me feel these things. Yeah.
No, I think you've hit it on the head. I think this may sound overly cynical, but I think ultimately people want to read about themselves.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we understand things about ourselves through other people's stories. Yeah, so maybe that's not that cynical at all. I think that's the way we understand ourselves and the world. And so help people do that.
Yeah, and just a couple other things, Chris. I
Yeah.
want to be mindful of your time. In writing about the outdoors and travel writing, and you've been kind of talking about it somewhat, is they can not in less skillful hands. They can be very rote, like just I went here, I saw this great mountain, and in the effort to elevate that kind of story and to stand out and still deliver the goods and bring outside readers where they want to go, whether they're living vicariously through you or they're actually going to be able to hopefully experience these wonderful things. In your experience, how have you been able to elevate the travel story so it isn't just banal? You're able to give it that extra panache.
Yeah, I mean that can be a little tricky at times. I think first of all, often you go on these trips, and in the case of the current story, the trip was 9 days long, but the assignment's 3,000 or 3,500 words. Okay, so I know finally from experience, massive chunks of the trip will never make it into the story, and so you need to come to peace with that. So I've filled 2 notebooks. Despite lots of heavy breathing and exhaustion, I've still managed to take a lot of notes, and most of those will go unused. And the sooner one comes to peace with that, the better. I think I tend to write a story like that, using chronology, just because I think it's easier for people to follow a trip, usually from beginning to end, though you can play with that as a writer. But I will bend. One of the things I learned somewhat early on is to bend time. And so, make it work for you. You're not going to be able to tell everything. There were entire days I didn't talk about on that 9-day trip. And so you expand certain moments and you make others vanish. And so I would really recommend that for people. So you might have an anecdote that's 500 words on the first or second day because it's really good and interesting and says something along with the theme. And then you get us to the first hut that night or something. And then you might have something on the third day. And then you might even skip 2 days after that. I think I guess what I'm trying to say, you can do that as a writer. You have the freedom to do that, and you should feel comfortable with doing that. And you have the ability to play with words, to skip over time and to stretch it and collapse it like that. As I said, it took me a little while to understand that was possible. But once you realize you can do that, it's very liberating. So I do that.
I'm picturing an accordion,
yeah.
Right? Like some parts of that billow are very expanded and others are crunched up.
Yeah. I mean, but once you realize you can do it, it allows for all sorts of opportunities. I think another thing I'll say in that is that generally speaking, I think it's particularly important to pay attention in the beginning of a trip, because maybe this is a little rote, but you often need to do a lot of setup at the start of a trip and to set the scene as things start to unfold and you're introducing people and this and that. So often things that happen toward the front end of a trip, generally speaking, unless someone gets mauled by a bear 3/4 of the way in, the events that it has generally seemed to be the case that things that happen in the first quarter of a trip tend to get in there a little more. I'm not saying that's right, but it seems to happen. So I try to pay particular attention at the beginning of a trip. But yeah, I think that's one thing that's really key is that accordion and that willingness and ability to play with time. But I would just encourage people to always find and look for themes and be willing to change the theme too. You might think you know what the story's about going in, but be open to the fact that it might end up being something completely different. Yeah.
Yeah, and that can be challenging too. Like if you pitch the story on a different theme and they're like, "Oh, that's cool. Like I like that idea." And then as you report it out, it's like starting to change itself. You're like, "Oh shit. Like am I veering the ship off course? Is this going to get it killed?" Like that's the ballet you got to play too.
Yeah. One other thing I do really like too is like, he's a great travel writer, among other kinds of writing for Outside, is Tim Cahill. And
oh yeah,
and
yeah.
I read a couple of his books as I tried to push through and do a little bit of a different kind of writing, travel writing, because I have done a fair amount of pretty straight travel writing for like the New York Times travel section and stuff. And what I really like that people like Cahill do is just take little asides, like almost like philosophical asides, or they'll have really fun leads that might not even be. They'll bring it. He's so good, he can bring it back to the project at hand. But he's got a lead for a story about canoeing the Missouri River, but his lead is all about the mud on the banks of the Missouri, and it's like 3-4 paragraphs long about just how bad the mud is, and it's just so good, and it's so atmospheric, and you're just like, holy shit, that's terrible mud, and then the mud, ends up being sort of a leitmotif throughout the piece, where the mud just keeps, they'll step on shore and they sink to their knees in the mud, so I like some of the stuff that he has done. And then I tried to learn from him, and I did a piece for Outside a couple of years ago on riding through the back of beyond outside of Moab and in the Bears Ears before it became the Bears Ears, with a group. And we rode for like 7 days through some really remote country on mountain bikes, and just would like take these asides about, and have like these kind of goofy ruminations on like the geology and stuff, and just be willing to be playful in the midst of your riding, and like take breaks from the chronology to kind of just blow up a moment and say, as I'm riding, I'm looking at these sandstone that, and then I, for instance, I was like, that stuff came actually from ancient mountains in the Appalachians that washed out here, sedimentized, got pushed up against, and now are caking my shins, and just like, and play, and then it led to a rumination on like, that'll kind of like blow your mind with the idea of infinity and stuff, and so like, as you're riding and you're kind of dehydrated and you're getting a little loopy and stuff, but just having fun where you've introduced some knowledge, but you're kind of also not taking yourself too seriously. And you're also breaking up the idea of, you're breaking up the chronology of the day, during one of these, but you're giving a sense of kind of where your places your mind goes during a long day of mountain bike riding. So I like doing that kind of stuff where you're expanding one moment among 7 days on a mountain bike ride. And then again, like other days didn't even appear.
And this is kind of a Stephen King's pencil kind of question, but when you were talking about when you were running there and you had your notebooks and you're filling up your notebook whenever you can. I'm a notebook junkie. I love notebooks. I love all kinds and shapes, and I have my favorites. But what kind of notebook is your go-to reporter notebook?
For those trips, there's more recent trips that have really been sort of adventure travel. And I flew to the Middle Fork of the Salmon last summer for something. I've really gone to just little flip top right in the rain notebooks.
Those are great.
With the wax paper, and then they make these space pens, but they're like $12 each. I just bring a ton of little golf pencils, and then you don't even need a sharpener, though. I'll bring a sharpener sometimes. You just you have a pocket knife because you're gonna have a Leatherman anyway, and so you can sharpen them and but I'll bring a couple of those right in the reins and probably like 4 pencils. And that's what I brought on the Switzerland running trip. And they're cheap. I know I can't destroy them. I can write on them if they're soaking wet. I do have lots of fancy Moleskine notebooks, but I won't even bring those on a trip like this. I think I brought one big one that I could sit at the end of the trip and write on the train, take some notes. But otherwise, no, I just had these little teeny notebooks that were tiny. They just slipped in the front pocket of my running vest. Yeah, pretty low tech.
Well, one thing that I always love to end these conversations on, Chris, is asking the guest for a recommendation of some kind. Anything is game for the listeners out there. Something that's really exciting you, and then you're like, this is cool, like a brand of coffee or a pair of socks or a Write in the Rain notebook. So, what might you recommend for listeners out there?
Hey, Brendan, and we could choose something else if you'd rather. One thing I have been thinking about is there was kind of a meme, or maybe it wasn't quite a meme, but I've heard people say in the last year or two, pitch a story like you're a middle-aged white guy with the confidence of a middle-aged white guy. And I think people are kind of saying it sort of disparagingly. But, I've been thinking about that, especially because I've been helping out another freelance writer who's not as experienced. And you can say it disparagingly if you want, but I think there's a lot of lessons to learn from how a middle-aged white guy like me pitches stories as a freelance writer. And there were just a couple things I wanted to recommend to people, because I think there's a lot of people out there, kind of doing this work. I was watching some of these folks, and they I've done this long enough that I pitch stuff, and I pitch it to the right editor, and I pitch it directly, and I follow up within 4 or 5 days, and then I follow up again, and I don't take silence for an answer. And, and then and then if they say they're interested, then, and then I ask how much the money is. And if it's not satisfactory, I ask for more. And when they send me the contract, if it's a shit contract, I ask for a better contract. And sometimes this stuff doesn't work out, but if it's really bad, I entertain the idea of walking away. And people will say, well, you're a big shot, you can do this. Well, no, I can't. I'm still trying to pay the mortgage too. But this one friend I'm working with, she kind of pussyfoots around on this stuff, and I don't know, maybe it's a generational thing, or maybe, and I don't say this disparagingly at all, but I think some women have been trained to be more demure about stuff. But no, own it, own it like a middle-aged white guy, and don't get pushed around by people. This is your job. You gotta pay the rent too, and you do hard work, and so be polite, be professional, but ask for what you deserve, and then move on to the next publication. Don't get jerked around for 6 months while somebody hems and haws about whether they want a story. So I guess I've been thinking about that recently. Be professional, be polite, and try and get what you need as a writer, so you can keep doing this work, because it's not getting any easier.
I think that's incredible counsel, and a great recommendation to kind of just put that hat on, and even if you don't internally believe it, just force it externally, and it'll probably, as you start to get a little bit more traction, and maybe you're like, holy shit, that actually worked. It'll start building the confidence, and that can only feed and bleed into other aspects of your life, be it your freelancing or just life in general. So that's really great counsel.
I hope it helps people. And I'm not perfect. I'm not making $4 a word at publications, but I think you're gonna get, to borrow a phrase from something else, you're not gonna get 100% of what you don't ask for, or something like that,
Oh, yeah. A great horse trainer that I've written about a lot, and he's a main character in a book I wrote a long time ago. He's very famous for upsetting upsetting a lot of big horses. He upset Smarty Jones in the 2004 Belmont Stakes with his colt Birdstone, and he upset Big Brown's Triple Crown bid in 2008 with this colt Datara. And he told me, he's like, Brendan, he's like, the only way to guarantee losing is to not run in the race. Yep. And even when he had a 40-1 horse, he's like, it might be 40-1, but I know the only way I'm going to lose this race is if I don't enter this colt. And sure enough, he entered those colts and he broke 2 Triple Crowns as a result, and cashed big checks for his owners and himself as a result. And the only way he would have known is by running that race. And I've always took that to heart. Yeah, no, exactly.
So I just would love to see people, just go with more confidence. There's a lot of really talented freelance writers out there who I feel sometimes sell themselves short. So.
Well, very nice. Well, Chris, thank you so much for carving out the time here to talk a little shop about how you go about the work and in this morass that we're in. So this was a whole lot of fun. So thank you so much for the time, and I can't wait to read what's coming next from you.
No, thanks for talking with me, Brendan. I appreciate it.
Great stuff there. Chris is doing the type of work I really dig. Yeah, the kind of stuff I'd like to do more of. Hope you got some great insights out of that. I know I did. Link up to the show on social at CNF Pod. Sign up for the Up to 11 CNF and monthly newsletter at BrendanO'Hara.com. Hey, too many great things to mention from that newsletter. You're just going to have to sign up. I mean, it's once a month. It's first of the month. No spam. So far as I can tell, you can't beat it. So lastly, last week I was listening to Headspace, and my favorite meditation teacher, Kesanga, had a segment about non-striving, which I thought was really, really profound. I know for me and longtime listeners of this program are well-versed and fluent in my frustrations and maybe annoyed by them. I don't know. And the lack of pace in my career and my trajectory in it. Yes, you know what I'm talking about. I've eternally felt grounded on the tarmac. And as much as I try to be grateful for, let's say, running water or shelter overhead and an ample refrigerator filled with fresh vegetables and alternative milks, I can't help but feel mired in this in-between. Something of a Crash Davis type who had some chops, but not enough to make it to the big leagues. But knows enough. Well, and he's had 21 days in the big leagues, but you know what I mean. He couldn't stay there and live the dream, so to speak. But he knows enough to talk about it. Can talk a big game, but just doesn't have quite enough talent to fully make it and stay there. And I'm just going to read a little bit from Kesanga's monologue, which I transcribed by hand in my bullet journal. So here's a couple cool things. Ambition is admirable, but can also be a double-edged sword, especially during these fleeting moments of calm before the week begins. We can get so wrapped up in where we want to go and getting there as fast as possible that we disregard opportunities for meaningful growth along the way and get bogged down by negative chatter whenever we fall short. It goes on, I encourage you to try a non-striving approach to pursuing any sort of goal. Yes, there is value in setting goals, but there's even more to gain from letting them go in order to focus on the journey. Goes on a bit more, but here's the last part I will read. But at the heart of a non-striving approach is a simple concept, trying less, yet being more. I love that. I loved it so much I wrote it down. I highlighted some things there, and I'm going to refer to that frequently. Almost like a daily meditation, if you will, just to remind myself that, things happen at their own pace. Can you hustle and be a non-striver? Is non-striving lazy? In this culture, maybe. For the hustle porn stars, most likely. But of late, I'm more inclined to surrender to where I'm at. And that doesn't mean give up. It's just like, maybe you should swim with the current instead of against it. At the risk of using a somewhat tired metaphor of a river, I know, but it makes sense. It really does. There are moments in a river where it's wide and placid and doesn't feel like it's moving very much. There are moments when it's turbulent, whitewater rapids. Sometimes it dries up to a trickle. But you know what else a river does? It never stops moving. So stay wild, CNFers, and if you can do, interview. See ya.